Hey guys, this is Casey Ferris. Thanks for checking out another one of my videos. Today, we're going to learn about barbecuing and spray paint. And so if you're not into those things, you can just click off this tutorial right now. But also, we're going to be learning about how to fix a shot that's overexposed or underexposed. The footage that I'm using is shot on a Blackmagic production camera 4K. So it has a little bit more dynamic range than, say a lower end camera. It doesn't matter what kind of footage you have, these tips should help you out a little bit. First of all, let's look at a shot with good exposure. If we look at our scopes, we see we have quite a bit of information here. Our levels are spread out between 0 and 1023. And so if we were to grade this, bring up the midtones a little bit, saturate it a little bit, maybe do some balancing, we end up with a pretty good image. But of course, that's not always the case. Sometimes we get something that is overexposed, like this shot. And by overexposed, I mean some of the detail that should be there is gone because it's too bright for the camera to record. You may be looking at this and saying, oh, well, that's not a big deal. You can just bring it down because you shot RAW. The problem with that is that I shot in ProRes. If I did shoot in RAW, I could probably bring these highlights back because you can recover quite a bit of highlights using RAW. But with a regular format like ProRes or any other compressed video, what you see is pretty much what you get. So back here on this shed, this image is slightly overexposed. You can see in the green and red channels, those are clipped off a little bit. Something to note is that this isn't up at 1023. That's because this is resolved range, not necessarily the camera's range. And because this is shot in a log format, it comes kind of squeezed down a little bit. So just because it isn't up at 1023 doesn't mean that it isn't clipped. So what can we do with something that is overexposed? I'm gonna reset my settings here and let's try and grade it. Keep my scopes here. And no matter what I do with the gain, I can bring it down a little bit, but it's gonna look weird. And so I want my gain actually up pretty high on the scopes because if something's bright enough to blow out, chances are it's pretty bright in real life. You want to make sure not to grade it like this just to try and save a little bit of data. It won't look good. So you can push this up like that, maybe bring some midtones and just bring it down a little bit. And really, no matter what we do, here's the hard truth. No matter what you do, you aren't going to make this look super great because the detail is gone. You might have heard of all sorts of tricks. Honestly, it doesn't truly get any better. You can't really fix this. What you can do is make it look a little nicer. Doing something like this, I'll put a window over this shed maybe and bring up my curves, and I can kind of play with this a little bit and maybe add a little bit of contrast in the highlights just to kind of fake that detail, but it's never going to be the same as this shot where we have actually good exposure. It's just never going to look as good. Same thing with the foreground objects here. I can play around with them and, kind of try and do something with the curves, but it really never gets better. That information is not there anymore. So that's overexposed. Let's take a look at underexposed footage. Here we have a shot that is woefully underexposed. Our signal doesn't even get above 256. We got nice highlights, definitely not clipping anything that's really bright, but the problem is that we're gonna be losing detail in the shadows. So let's see what happens when we actually bring this up to a good level. I'm gonna take my gain and just crank it up like a beast, and my gamma, push that up quite a bit. And I mean, we're just really stretching out this footage. And it's high quality footage, and you can definitely do this better with the codec like ProRes, but it's still not gonna be ideal. You're gonna get some weird casts in your shadows, and you kind of do your best to stretch this out and get some kind of good exposure here. And honestly, it doesn't look terrible, but when you zoom in, you'll start to notice that there's quite a bit of noise. And if we scrub this, you'll see it even more. And of course, we can use something like Neat Video to clean that up a little bit. So I'm gonna add a new serial node and grab my Neat Video and put it on there. I'll hit Options. Let's zoom in here to the shed and maybe select this gray, sample some of that. I'll hit Auto Profile, Auto Fine Tune, and see we can clean it up a little bit. which definitely helps, and I can add some sharpening after that. And then, you know, I can do some things to actually make this look pretty good. But again, it's never going to look quite as good as something that's actually exposed well. So let's take a look at our good exposure. See, we have a lot better colors, a little more detail in the shadows, and definitely less weird color casts in our shadows. So if you're gonna have to choose one, overexposed or underexposed, I would probably go with underexposed, especially if you have a good codec like ProRes. And when you boost up the levels and do some noise reduction, it's gonna be okay, but it's not gonna be as good as actually shooting it right. Let's take a look at another example. Here's one with some skin tones in it because that's what everybody likes. And this one looks pretty underexposed, but with this camera, it's actually pretty good exposure just because it saves these highlights. And again, you can boost up those shadows. And so when I grade this, I can keep that detail in the skin. And it's not too grainy, not too messy. And that's a pretty good shot. Now here's one that's a little bit overexposed. We of course get good detail in the shadows and the midtones, but right here on his skin, we can see on the scopes is actually blown out. So once we do a grade on it, it looks pretty good. It's not horrible, but we are losing detail in the skin here. So if you have a shot like this that's mostly good with a little bit of blown out skin tones, here's how I make that a little less horrible. I'm gonna make a new serial node, and I'm gonna qualify these blown out pieces of his skin. So I'll go to my qualifier, and I'm just gonna select these brighter parts. I'm gonna turn off my hue and my saturation. And so now I'm just selecting things by luminance. And I'll move my high all the way up, turn off my high softness, and I'll move my low threshold up until I start eating into those highlights. And then maybe soften it up, clean my black a little bit, clean my white. And now I have pretty much just the brightest parts of the image selected. And because I'm mostly concerned about these skin tones, I can take this node and kind of push some warmth into the gain and kind of try and match his skin color a little bit, maybe even bring the gain down just a little so that it smooths out his skin just a little bit. So here's before and here's after. Again, it's never gonna be as good as actually exposing it right, but it's gonna look a little less horrible than that blown out shiny skin. Of course, you wanna be careful because if you go too far, it can start to look kind of blobby, and that's not good either. So that's a little tip for fixing skin tones. And of course, if we have a horrifically underexposed image like this, we can boost it up and get lots and lots of noise and do some noise reduction, do some sharpening, and do a little bit more work. And it might look decent, but there's kind of some weird color pollution in the midtones. And of course, we can never get rid of all the noise. It kind of looks a little funky still. So yeah, if you have an underexposed image, boost it up, do some noise reduction, but it's not gonna be ideal. If you have an image that's a little bit overexposed, you might be able to do some tricks to make it look a little better in the blown out parts. But if you have an image that's just way crazy overexposed like this, I hate to be the bringer of bad news, but you're just never going to get that detail back. It's gone, okay? It doesn't come back. So anyway, hope that helps. Use those tips for things that are slightly over or underexposed to make them a little better, but really the best thing you can do is shoot it right next time. So for those of you who are frustrated, go ahead and hit the dislike button and leave your specific hate in the comments below. If you like this, hit like. If you have any questions or comments, leave them in the comments below. And if you want more post-production tutorials and color grading tutorials, things on DaVinci Resolve and Premiere and all sorts of goodies, subscribe to my channel here on YouTube. Anyway, until next time, my name will be Casey Ferris, unless I change it legally.